Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. I'm going to start off today by talking about sacrifice, which is what our leaders are demanding of us now. It's a curious thing to me because, especially in the last few years, our leaders, well, particularly Canadian leaders, have told us that Canada is a terrible place, and it's always been a terrible place, and that people like me are responsible for this with our white supremacy and systemic racism and the like. I've been predicting this actually for some decades. It hit me especially after the 1995 Second Quebec referendum that if you have a country where patriotism is not allowed and the government is constantly, and the elite is constantly railing against the Canadian people, why would they imagine that in any kind of emergency, in any kind of crisis, that these Canadian people would step up and sacrifice? What's in it for them? To make it easier for the government to replace us with foreigners who are far, far better people than we are. Here's a story from Global News. Rachel Gilmore. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is pleading with Canadians to reduce their contacts as much as possible as coronavirus cases continue to surge across the country, and he warned that Canada's future is on the line. This is the future of our country. This is the future of our children. It's the future of our loved ones and our seniors. It's our economy. It's our businesses. It's everything all together. Oh, I see now they're worrying about the economy and our businesses and our society, because everything that they have done, Trudeau and Canadian leaders, has been to wreck Canadian society, to wreck Canadian businesses, to atomize everyone in this country as much as possible, to persuade us that every other person in this country represents an imminent, deadly threat to every other person in this country. Right from the very beginning, going back to February or March, we've heard we're all in this together. No, we're very much not all in this together, because there are people like Trudeau who gets paid for putting people out of work. And then there are the many inessential people. Now, how can we be in this altogether when, again, the government has decided that we must be scared to death of each other? Trudeau acknowledged that people are tired of the pandemic and its restrictions on our daily lives, but said adherence to public health measures is more important now than ever before. Oh, so everything that you have done up to now has not worked. And so what are you going to do next? More of the same. Much, much more of the same. More and harder. Trudeau said the cases across the country are spiking massively. We are facing a winter that's going to drive people inside more and more, and we're really at risk of seeing caseloads go up and hospitals get overwhelmed and more loved ones dying. Well, the cases across the country are spiking massively because there is more testing. None of these stories mention how many people are dying in Canada, because it's not very many. Few of these stories mention just how close our hospitals are to being overwhelmed, because they are not close to being overwhelmed. With the holiday season looming just around the corner, Trudeau also warned that Christmas is going to have to look very different this year. A normal Christmas, quite frankly, is out of the question, Trudeau said. Yes. Suppose Canadians thought that they were voting for a ruling party, for a prime minister in 2015 and in 2019, but no, actually, they were voting for a god. Trudeau's comments come just hours after Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam warned that Canada is not on a good trajectory as she unveiled the latest figures in the virus's spread Friday morning. Tam warned that if Canadians don't reduce their contacts, Canada could see 20,000 cases daily by the end of December. She urged for a return to Canadians only undertaking essential activities in order to avoid healthcare systems being crushed under the weight of the caseload surge. Now, to me, I could be wrong about this, but no, I'm not wrong about this. If you have a massive increase in the number of cases, but few people are hospitalized, even fewer are going into ICUs, and even fewer than that are dying, what does this tell us? It tells us that COVID-19 is far less of a deadly threat than we have been told. It can't tell us anything other than that. Trudeau echoed Tam's message in his own Friday press conference, noting that he'll also be working from home as much as possible. He was speaking from outside his home, Rideau Cottage, the same venue where he held daily press conferences in the early days of the pandemic. Yes, daily press conferences with reporters asking questions like, "What's up with that beard, Mr. Prime Minister?" Or, "How did you get to be so awesome?" Trudeau pleaded with Canadians to cancel any plans that could lead to non-essential contacts. If you were planning to see friends this weekend, maybe don't. If there was a birthday party or a gathering for dinner you were thinking about doing, don't do it, Trudeau said. We're in a moment right now with all the sacrifices I know Canadians have been making these past 10 months. We are now going to have to really tighten up once again. Trudeau acknowledged that the news of the increasingly stringent measures Canadians must take is frustrating, especially as some Canadians have given up on following the rules. I know we've all heard stories of people who've thrown up their hands and are not doing their part anymore. People who have stopped wearing masks or people who are going out more than they should. It's tempting for all of us to say, well, okay, maybe I can loosen up a bit too, but the reality is we need to go in the opposite direction. And how has that worked out so far? Well, it hasn't worked. From the very beginning, we were told about flattening the curve and circuit breakers and all that sort of stuff, and it hasn't worked. Because isolating healthy people is something that has never been done before. Quarantining healthy people, never been done before for obvious reasons. Well, the most obvious reason being that it's stupid. Oh, second most obvious reason, that it doesn't work. Trudeau explained that if the COVID fatigue sufferers don't start adhering to the rules, then those who are already following the restrictions will have to do any more. He said that if Canadians don't succeed in stepping up their game, people will die. Help us beat the second wave, save lives, because that is what is at stake. Trudeau said, every person that we lose to this virus is someone who has family and friends who love them, who had plans for tomorrow and things they still wanted to do. Given that I believe that the average age of the people who have died of COVID-19 in Canada is 82, I don't think that very many of these people actually had plans for tomorrow. They're stuck in nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and of course they are banned from seeing anyone because it's not enough that these people have been killed through the negligence of these facilities, but no, we have to make it as cruel as possible for them. To date, over 11,000 Canadians have died of COVID-19. And of course, I suppose a relevant question would be, how many people normally die in Canada every year? Well, a lot more than 11,000, I can tell you. But no, it's all about sacrifice. The people who keep getting paid for doing badly at their jobs or telling everyone else that they must make sacrifices. Oh, and apparently Alberta has not done enough. Apparently Alberta hasn't wrecked its province sufficiently. This is from Canadian Press, a member of Jason Kenney, he's the premier. A member of his cabinet is backtracking on a comment that seemed to suggest Alberta was waiting for hospitals to reach their limit before tightening COVID-19 restrictions. The move comes amid mounting calls for the premier to impose tougher public health measures. Jason Luan, the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, yes, I'm going to read that again. The Alberta Cabinet has an Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, says that he was wrong to suggest that anyone is waiting until the system reaches capacity. In an online town hall on Friday, he said the province was waiting to see where hospital capacity intensive care units will be pushed to our limit and then gradually reduce more activities that way. Any proof that that works, Jason Luan? No. No, there isn't. Once again, the only way that these lockdowns would work is if we were all locked in our residences and not allowed to leave until we were dead. And we may be heading to that point. But let's take a look at the numbers here from Alberta. How many people are in hospital in Alberta? I'll remind you that there are 4.4 million people. There are 328 people in hospital and 62 in intensive care. Now, I'm going to guess that the intensive care capacity of Alberta is many, many times more than 62. But there you have it, that everyone else is panicking. So Alberta must panic as well. This is from National News Watch. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is set to meet Monday with his COVID-19 steering committee amid an alarming rise in cases, has suggested more restrictions are coming, but a holistic approach to the pandemic will continue. Kenney was due to leave isolation later Monday after coming into contact with a person with COVID-19. He tested negative. On Saturday, in a Zoom call with the Canada-India Foundation, Kenney said new measures are likely coming, but he continued to reject a sweeping shutdown of businesses and community activity as intrusive and ineffective. He said, we will likely have to take some more restrictive measures given the current direction of things here, because ultimately our goal is to protect the healthcare system from being overwhelmed while minimizing damage to the broader social, economic, mental, emotional, and physical health of society. But our point is we are not exclusively focused on COVID-19. We understand that for every policy in response to it, there are unintended consequences. So we've taken a holistic approach, and we believe that that has been effective. But meanwhile, the opposition in Alberta and the media are screaming, why aren't you panicking enough? You're not panicking. And it is your job as a leader to panic as hard as you can for as long as you can, and to let everyone know that, living life is, it's not possible. It's just not possible because of this disease that hardly kills anyone who gets it. If you are under the age of 70, you have a 99.95% chance of surviving COVID-19. It turns out that the Bay, or Hudson's Bay on Queen Street in Toronto, is open. And the media is not happy about that at all. How is it that this store could be open? Yes, let's squeal. Josh Rubin is squealing in the Toronto Star. He describes himself as business reporter, ex-sports guy at the Toronto Star, beer writer, beer judge. I tweet mostly about beer, sports, politics, and business. Well, I'm kind of getting the impression this guy likes beer. He wrote a story, despite lockdown orders, Hudson's Bay on Queen Street remains open. Despite the lockdown, company says the store is essential in part because of a half-opened Saks food hall run by Pusataries. Well, I guess if the Toronto Star has its way, they'll deal with that quickly. Oh, never let a crisis go to waste. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News writes, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has labeled discussion of the Great Reset as a conspiracy theory, despite the fact that he advocated it 2 months ago. The Great Reset began trending on Twitter on Monday after a UN conference call Trudeau participated back in September received fresh attention. During his presentation, Trudeau said that the coronavirus pandemic had provided an opportunity for a reset, almost precisely mirroring Great Reset rhetoric espoused by the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab and other world leaders. I'll mention as well that Trudeau has adopted the inane slogan, Building Back Better, the same slogan adopted by Joe Biden and adopted by Boris Johnson. However, after Trudeau received criticism from Conservative MPs, he dismissed the issue altogether as a conspiracy theory. Denying that the Great Reset was part of a grand plot, the Prime Minister claimed that the matter was merely disinformation. Quote, "We're living in a time of anxiety where people are looking for reasons for things that are happening to them, the difficult moment we're in. It's nice to be able to try and find someone to blame, someone to point to, something to get mad at. Well, I'm getting mad at you. Because everything that you and Theresa Tam have done has served to wreck my country. And apparently you are unable to learn from your mistakes." I think we're seeing a lot of people fall prey to disinformation. If Conservative MPs want to start talking about conspiracy theories, well, that's their choice. I'm going to stay focused on helping Canadians get through this and making sure that the world we leave to our kids is even better than the world we inherited from our parents. Well, fat chance of that. It's not, as James Bellingpole said, it's not a conspiracy theory if they tell you exactly what they are doing. Paul Joseph Watson continues, as we previously highlighted, legacy media outlets like the New York Times are still claiming the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, even as world leaders openly announce it. Indeed, former Secretary of State John Kerry, who apparently is going to be Joe Biden's climate czar, attended a recent panel discussion at the World Economic Forum during which he asserted that a Great Reset was urgently needed to stop the rise of populism. WEF founder Klaus Schwab also recently published a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset, in which he said that despite the pandemic not representing an existential threat, it should be exploited to completely reorder the world and usher in a technocratic, transhumanist dystopia. Reminds me of this word neoconservatism. I guess it was, after the disaster of the invasion of Iraq, that you started hearing important people say neoconservatism. There's no such thing as neoconservatism. There's just conservatism. And conservatism has always been about getting the United States involved in stupid, endless, and pointless wars all around the world. Neoconservatism, the use of that word is anti-Semitic. Oh, don't say that. Oh, who is the father of neoconservative? Well, it was a man called Irving Kristol. And the father, William, aka Bill Kristol, as it turns out. And Irving Kristol wrote 2 books with the word neoconservatism in the title. So on the one hand, the founder of neoconservatism is happy enough to call it neoconservatism, but the rest of us are told you are not allowed to use that word, because if you do, it means you're an anti-Semite. We can talk about the Great Reset, but you are not allowed to talk about the Great Reset because you seem to think that it's a bad thing. In the same way that we can talk about the Great Replacement because we love the Great Replacement, you are not allowed to talk about the Great Replacement because the use of that phrase indicates that you are a white supremacist, quite possibly a Nazi. Yes, a snarky piece from the Toronto Star. A Conservative MP warns that Justin Trudeau wants a Great Reset. Conspiracy theorists are worried too. When the founder of the World Economic Forum talks about people being, having chips in their body, and in the future, our thoughts will be able to be read, one would think That would be off-putting to some people, but nah, just a conspiracy theory. Metatron says, when is the next election in Canada? Trudeau seems like he will never go away. Well, the next election in Canada could be in 4 years' time. It could be tomorrow, or in 5 weeks, because Trudeau has a minority government. The NDP party, which used to be called Socialist, they're just identity politics now, they're supporting and propping him up in the House of Commons. So as long as that compact lasts, then I guess it will be some time before an election. Could be as late as 2024. Hello to Walrus Libertarian, Ed McNick, Tom Anderson. Tom Anderson, you will own nothing and you will be happy. The internationalist gangsters are pushing this slogan in lefty alt media. I don't know. Maybe these younger people have owned so little during their lives that the idea of ownership is alien to them. No, we'll just stream everything from Steve Jobs and from Amazon. Now, the fact that means that all the media is controlled by a handful of people, they don't seem to have a problem with that, because the only things that are being banned are things that people shouldn't be able to watch anyway. Oh, I want to hear KMG's thoughts in Trump distancing himself from Powell YT. Yeah, sure. Just briefly, I think this is for Sidney Powell's own protection. Don from Beyond says, hello, Kevin. I don't often comment, but I'm always here cheering you out on the background. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Chokokin666 says, I'm depressed and have zero energy. How are you? Well, I suppose I have a fair amount of energy. Comes through in my voice, I suppose. Depressed. I'm certainly unhappy about the turn of events in 2020. And I've always been accused of being a gloomy fellow, but I would not have thought that we would have given up all of our liberties just like that for such a flimsy pretext. Jonathan Paul, hello, Professor. The great and powerful Morgoth sent me dozens of new Twitter followers today. I subscribed to something, what was it called? Unfollow Twitter, something like that. And it tells me all of the people who left my account. And this is quite mysterious to me, because apparently all of these people leave my stop following me every day. It just seems odd to me. People who followed me for 2 years, 3 years, etc. Why would they stop following me? Was there something particularly outrageous that I said? Because unfollowing people on Twitter is a bit of a pain, So I've heard accusations that this is often not done by the people themselves, but is done by Twitter to certain people. I see that James Kirkpatrick at VDare has unfollowed me, and I wonder what I did to offend him. Yes, at VDare James K. It's a mystery. Let's see, Chogokin666, these people are all operatives of the World Economic Forum and their various tentacles. Professor Paul says, Cluthu and Krakens have tentacles too. Don't be depressed or they will restrict your travel, but then how could we not all be depressed? Well, I don't travel anywhere anymore, so that is not a big problem. Of course, I don't know where I'm going to be living in, I don't know, a month or two. And if I move back to the island, what sort of hoops am I going to have to jump through to be allowed on the ferry? Head McNeck says this entire thing has become nothing more than a realized wet dream for the female-brained neurotics in charge. Yes, why do women love tyranny? Warwick Libertarian says, who needs an economy? The bank has money. It has money for now. How long it will continue to have money is an interesting question. Okay, let's see. Do we have anyone else in the chat? These globalists aren't going to win, says Quacholongo. I certainly hope not. I mean, we have to keep fighting. If Joe Biden becomes president, the change is going to come thick and fast. There are going to be millions of people pouring over the United States border. And Biden's administration, come on down, come on in. What can we get you? Can we sign you up to vote? Oh, you're supposed to wait for 5 years? That seems unreasonable. Someone says something about Paul. Paul Joseph Watson. Earl Pipe says, I once had a check mark, have a long involved Twitter convo with me just to covertly figure out if I'd qualified for one of their bad think block lists. Jim Smith says, I'm surprised too that Kirkpatrick should unfollow you. I don't know any political disagreements you'd had with each other. Quacholango says, KMG, I need a dirty script latrine wallet. No, any? Okay, was there something about Paul Joseph Watson there? William Bill Crystal, yes, indeed. I remember when he was, chief of staff for the vice president of the United States, Dan Quayle. And Quayle eventually got fed up with Bill Crystal. He believed that he was pursuing a personal agenda and not the agenda of the vice president of the United States. And he was famously quoted as saying that the people in my office would be better off reading more People magazine and less National Review. Okay, let's take a look at the panic stations here. That is to say, the Drudge Report. Thanksgiving flashback. Trump mocked Turkey for refusing to concede, demanding recount. Overexposed president goes dark in defeat. Averaged 48 minutes on camera every day in 2020. Blames lawyers as fools, making him look bad. Michigan certifies Biden's win. Secret Service asked about protecting soon-to-be former president full-time in Florida. Bernstein, I guess that what Carl Bernstein, lists 21 senators who have privately expressed contempt for Donald. And now the COVID horror. Health officials make final plea before holiday. Peak tests, cases, hospitalizations. Global tracking system for travelers. I don't know. I don't want to be part of a global tracking system. Well, any more than I am already. But I guess I just have to give up travel then. Trump to leave with higher boarding crossings than during any month under Obama. I'm not even going to look at that story because I know that the essence of it is false. Immigration to the United States has simply collapsed under Trump. Oh, Pope compares Trump rallies to Hitler's. Yeah, I'm going to get to that story. I'm going to get to that remarkable story soon enough. Here's a story from Joseph Mercola at LouRockwell.com. Who pressed the Great Reset button? What is this Great Reset we're now hearing about? In a nutshell, the Great Reset refers to a global agenda to monitor and control the world through digital surveillance. As explained by journalist James Corbett in his October 16, 2020 Corbett report, the Great Reset is a new social contract that ties every person to it through an electronic ID linked to your bank account and health records and a social credit ID that will end up dictating every facet of your life. It's about getting rid of capitalism and free enterprise and replacing them with sustainable development and stakeholder capitalism, terms that belie their nefarious anti-humanity intents. As noted in the book Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, sustainable development is technocracy. The sustainable development movement has taken careful steps to control its true identity, strategy, and purpose. But once the veil is lifted, you will never see it any other way. Once its strategy is unmasked, everything else will start to make sense. In her blog post, The Great Reset for Dummies, Tessalina summarizes the purpose behind the global reset. The mathematical reason for the Great Reset is that thanks to technology, the planet has gotten small and the infinite expansion economic model is bust. But obviously the super wealthy want to continue staying super wealthy, and so they need a miracle, another bubble, plus a surgically precise system for managing what they perceive as their limited resources. Thus, they desperately want a bubble providing new growth out of thin air, literally, while simultaneously they seek to tighten the peasants' belts, an effort that starts with behavioral modification, aka resetting the Western peasants' sense of entitlement to high life standards and liberties. See awful privilege. The psychological reason for the Great Reset is the fear of losing control of property, the planet. I suppose if you owe billions and move trillions, your perception of reality gets funky and everything down below looks like an anthill that exists for you. Just ants and numbers, your assets. Thus, the practical aim of the Great Reset is to fundamentally restructure the world's economy and geopolitical relations based on two assumptions. One, that every element of nature and every life form is part of the global inventory, managed by the allegedly benevolent state, which in turn is owned by several suddenly benevolent wealthy people via technology. And two, that all inventory needs to be strictly accounted for, be registered in a central database, be readable by a scanner, and easily ID'd and be managed by AI using the latest science. The goal is to count and then efficiently manage and control all resources, including people, on an unprecedented scale with unprecedented digital precision. All while the masters keep enjoying vast patches of conserved nature, free of unnecessary sovereign peasants and their unpredictability. On October 5th, 2020, Winter Oak article addressed the technocratic fascist vision of Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, who wrote the book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Schwab announced the World Economic Forum's Great Reset initiative in 2020, which includes stripping all people of their privately owned assets. In addition to being a staunch technocrat, Schwab also has a strong transhumanist bend, and he has spoken of a near future in which humans merge with machines, in which law enforcement will be able to read our minds. Winter Oak, a British non-profit social justice organization, points out that Schwab and his globalist accomplices are using the COVID-19 pandemic to bypass democratic accountability, to override opposition, to accelerate their agenda, and to impose it on the rest of humankind against our will. Ultimately, the Great Reset will result in two tiers of people: the technocratic elite, who have all the power and rule over all assets, and the rest of humanity, who have no power, no assets, and no say-so in anything. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? I'll briefly mention a story by Ricardo Duchesne at the Council of European Canadians. Canadian universities have extensive research partnerships with Chinese state to develop a surveillance society against, wait for it, far-right Canadians. Can you believe this? Quietly behind our backs, our universities have been reaching extremely lucrative agreements with the Communist Party of China to cooperate in the development of surveillance and population control techniques and the use of facial recognition and digital monitoring against those who question mass immigration and the rise of China to global supremacy. Chinese financial power will be combined with Western scientific research to develop technologies that will allow the Canadian government to surveil, quote, every health record, every banking record, every social media post, unquote, of Canadians to ensure the peaceful replacement of whites. These research partnerships are also intended to augment the military and global power of the Chinese. The Globe and Mail admitted in October 2018 that Canadian academics have been collaborating on dozens of projects with Chinese military researchers, raising concerns that China is inadvertently helping China modernize its armed forces. The research partnerships include the enrollment of Chinese defense scientists as graduate students and visiting scholars at Canadian universities. The Globe and Mail, however, does not grasp the full implications of what's going on. We can't understand these partnerships solely in terms of how they benefit the Chinese military. These research exchanges need to be conceptualized as part of a wider attempt to develop a surveillance society that will ensure the fulfillment of the program of racial diversification. We know that a fundamental mission of our universities, as openly stated in their official websites, is to brainwash students to accept the total diversification of Canada. Behind the scenes, universities have taken another crucial function: the development of a Canada that is under total surveillance for the purpose of eradicating any form of dissent. And leading this, of course, is the University of British Columbia, where I worked for 12 years. It's a university. Here's the nice version of the initialism that UBC, they've been saying for decades, stands for the University of a Billion Chinese. Well, they're throwing their weight around now. Oh, Thanksgiving is coming up on Thursday. And apparently Americans are still treating it like the holiday that it has been for decades. And our bettors are not pleased by this. Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit. Despite the best efforts by Democrat hypocrites and crazy Dr. Anthony Fauci, 50 million Americans will travel for Thanksgiving this year. They may have ruined your year and the U.S. economy, but they won't kill off Thanksgiving. Democrats will have a heart attack over this. Guess we'll have to add that to the COVID stats, too. HuffPost, people crowded at airports are going to get us into even more trouble than we are right now, warned Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is a guy who was at he got to be part of a crowd, and it was a very, very small crowd, probably counted on two hands, at a Washington Nationals game, and there he was yucking it up. There were three people side by side in the seats, and his nose and mouth were not covered by a mask. Do these people actually believe that masks work? Dan Diamond tweeted on Thursday, the CDC called on Americans not to travel for Thanksgiving. On Friday and Saturday, the TSA did more than 2 million screenings at airports, the highest two-day total since mid-March. From Monica Showalter at the American Thinker, sorry, Dr. Fauci, you too, Joe Biden, Americans refuse to cancel Thanksgiving. To judge by the election results, assuming you believe them, Americans want more lockdowns, given that Joe Biden ostensibly won. Biden campaigned on a lockdown platform, vowing a national mask mandate, along with a campaign promise to run the government's COVID response better than President Trump, plagiarizing much of Trump's already done actions and calling them his own. Trump hammered Biden on his eternal lockdown plan in the final days of the campaign, and Biden retreated a little, denying he vowed no such thing. But once he was convinced he won, he came out full bore for national mask wearing again, along with obedience to science and government officials. Now that Thanksgiving is on, nobody is listening. It's the biggest sign yet of widespread civil disobedience to unreasonable demands. There are a hell of a lot of others, too. The Post's top story is about how a New York synagogue makes secret plans to hold a large gathering without masks, or anti-Semitic socialist Mayor Bill de Blasio's next opportunity to send in his goons. A big bar in Florida reopened only to be packed with people disregarding calls to wear masks, only to be shut. And in a story the Post should have picked up, TMZ got the scoop on a New York swingers club being raided by the local sheriff. Apparently, the miscreants were gathering in larger than the permitted numbers and not wearing masks or socially distancing, which rather than the orgy was the source of the outrage. Yes, a socially distanced orgy. Yeah. From the Washington Post, and I'm always amused, it takes three people to write this story. Paulina Ferozi, Lena H. Sun, and Hannah Knowles. With nationwide coronavirus hospitalizations topping 80,000 and case counts on the cusp of 200,000 a day, officials and experts are giving their final pleas for caution in the days before Thanksgiving. Average cases reported each day in the United States have jumped nearly 15% in a week, according to data tracked by the Washington Post. Deaths are also on the rise, with some communities overwhelmed by bodies. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. People have been taking their cameras to hospitals. These hospitals that are supposedly overrun. They're not overrun. This is from Christina Lalia at the Gateway Pundit. Pretty funny story. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat, was confronted about his COVID lockdown orders and mask mandate while he was out dining with his family. A group of fed-up people confronted a maskless Murphy dining with his family at a restaurant in Asbury Park over the weekend. Murphy just extended New Jersey's COVID lockdown order for the 9th time since March. The state has experienced significant upticks in the rate of reported new cases across all countries, demonstrating the need for many of the state's current measures to remain in place, both to reduce additional new infections and to save lives. Murphy is out enjoying a dinner with his family when he tells his state to restrict Thanksgiving gatherings and harasses gym owners. "Oh my God, Murphy, you are such a dick," one woman said, as another is heard saying, "How are you doing? How are you doing? You having fun with your family in the meantime? You're having all kind of other bullshit going on at your house?" Murphy continued to cut his steak and smile. "Are you guys a little too drunk?" one of Murphy's sons asked. "Can you put your mask on?" "No, I'm not drunk, as a matter of fact," woman said. "You can go F yourself. How's that? I don't need an effing mask. You know why I don't need a mask? Because there ain't nothing effing wrong with me." "You don't have a mask on," the woman said, scolding Murphy's son. Murphy actually put a mask on after being browbeaten by the woman, and it was caught on video. But of course, you've all heard about the governor of California who had a dinner at a very expensive restaurant, the French Laundry or something. It's like $800 a person. And there they all are, not social distancing, and they're not wearing masks. They don't believe it. This is from John Nolte at Breitbart. Not only is Governor Kate Brown, who I believe is America's first bisexual governor, what I take from that is that the sex of people that she is currently not having sex with would be female. Not only is Governor Kate Brown instituting an utterly pointless 6-person limit on at-home get-togethers during Thanksgiving week, she's calling on Oregon residents to snitch on one another if the 6-person limit is violated. Look, this is no different than what happens if there's a party down the street and it's keeping everyone awake. What do neighbors do? They call law enforcement because it's too noisy, Governor Stalin told local media on Friday. This is just like that. It's like a violation of a noise ordinance, to which Nolte responds, no, 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 no. It's nothing like someone hosting a noisy party late into the night. It's not even close to someone hosting a noisy party late into the night. You might as well compare hand grenades to jelly beans. Yeah. When I last spoke about my own province last week, I was not fully aware of just how grim British Columbia's lockdown is. There is no social gathering allowed. Just family members. Oh, and members of your bubble, whatever that means. Members of your bubble. And, you know, the way that they speak to us now, that again, this is something that it's simply unthinkable. Oh, here's Jeremy Faust, MD, MS, ER physician. He actually tweeted this. It's a parody of a famous scene from Kubrick's film Full Metal Jacket. This is my mask. There are many like it, but this one is mine. My mask is my best friend. It is my life. I must master it as I master my life. Without me, my mask is useless. Without my mask, I am useless. It's not just a respiratory disease. It is a brain parasite. Yeah, let's see. This is from the British government. Ministers endorsed a shared objective of facilitating some limited additional household bubbling for a small number of days. I suppose it's not just treatment we're getting that is nightmarish, but the way that it is described. Really? Okay, so we're led by tyrants now, but they all speak like middle managers. There is some resistance to what I like to call the sanitary dictatorship. And let's see if I can bring up a story here From Christina Layla at Gateway Pundit. Get out, go get a warrant. Business owners in Buffalo, New York stand up to Cuomo's COVID orders, kick out sheriff and health inspector. Business owners in Buffalo, fed up with Cuomo's authoritarian COVID lockdown orders, asserted their constitutional rights and kicked out sheriffs and health inspectors on Friday night. 50 business owners gathered inside of a shuttered gym in Buffalo Friday when two sheriffs and a so-called health inspector showed up to harass the group in response to an anonymous tip. The business owners shouted down and kicked out the health inspector and told the sheriffs to come back with a warrant. You're on private property. You need to leave, one of the business owners shouted to the health inspector. This is a private party. It's private property. Go get a warrant. You're not wanted here. The obese sheriff began lecturing one of the business owners on mask wearing, to which the business owner replied, "Don't worry about my health. My health is not your concern." The business owner shouted down the trespassers, "Get out, get out, get out. We will not comply. We will not comply." The brave business owners followed the sheriffs and health inspectors into the parking lot and told them to get off their property. "They're Nazis," one yelled. "Take your commie shit elsewhere," another one shouted. Oh, what's the latest about the love gov under Cuomo? Dishing it 24/7. This is from Hannah Blow at Breitbart. Cuomo warned yesterday that certain areas of New York City are heading toward tighter coronavirus restrictions, including the most restrictive red zone, which prohibits all gatherings deemed non-essential. The Democrat governor stated some areas, namely Staten Island, Long Island, and parts of Manhattan, are in the warning track and could soon face additional restrictions due to concerns over rising infection rates and hospital capacity. The rate goes up, there are more restrictions to slow the economy. That's bad for business. Who is making it bad for business? You are making it bad for business. They act as if this is, fallen from the sky. Oh, all of these businesses are going under. What's happening? It's not the virus, it's the panic. The rate goes up, there are more restrictions to slow the economy. That's bad for business. Rates go up, you overburden the hospital system, you overburden doctors, nurses, you have possible equipment, supplies. Numbers go up and people die, period. Yeah, how about the 5,000, 10,000, 35,000 deaths that the Love Gov is personally responsible for in the state of New York? Here's an amusing story from MSN News. A man has visited a Welsh supermarket in his underwear to protest a ban on selling clothes, which are deemed non-essential under new lockdown rules. Wales went into a firebreak lockdown on Saturday to halt the spread of COVID-19. The lockdown requires people to stay at home with few exceptions. Supermarkets in Wales have blocked off aisles stocking non-essential items to stop clothes, shoes, toys, electronics, and bedding from being sold. To protest the new restrictions, Christopher Noden visited a Tesco supermarket wearing just a face mask and his underwear. A video of the 38-year-old walking to the store unclothed has clocked up more than 230,000 views on Facebook. In the video description, his wife, Dawn Noden, said, "Please note that no lockdown rules were broken. Nobody was put at risk. This non-essentials list is beyond a joke." Chocolate, sugar, alcohol, and tobacco, all classed as essential items. I don't like that form of argument. Oh, well, I guess we'll just have to ban chocolate, sugar, alcohol, and tobacco. Then I don't really see them banning alcohol and tobacco, because I think they understand that those are the two of the things that is preventing an uprising, a revolution, perhaps. Dan Hodges of the Daily Mail tweeted, "Started Christmas planning based on the Four Families announcement, then realized there's something genuinely scary about how we've let the state take control of areas of our lives that would have been unthinkable 12 months ago." Well, that's a funny thing about the unthinkable, that many things that were once unthinkable have become, well, they're just part of our everyday lives now. A brave man in Britain, Lord Sumption, Steve Watson at Summit News, A British Supreme Court judge has slammed the UK government as control freaks for attempting to control people's lives under the guise of COVID and labeled it morally and constitutionally indefensible to define what freedoms the public should and shouldn't have. In an op-ed published Sunday, that would be in the Daily Mail, or the Sunday Mail rather, Lord Sumption noted that the debate about whether to let us have a family Christmas perfectly sums up what is wrong with this government's handling of the crisis. Sumption wrote that there are many different answers to the dilemmas of a COVID Christmas, yet the crux of the matter is whether we should be allowed to make the choice for ourselves instead of having it imposed on us by law. But for the Jacobins of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, and the control freaks in the Department of Health, theirs is the only answer. The British government has posited allowing people to spend 5 days in the company of their relatives over Christmas, but with the caveat that in January they will have to pay back the privilege with more lockdown time, specifically another 25 days. Look, this is insane. The government is telling us that you can't have people getting together with each other because super spreader events and the like. People will die. Oh, but for these 5 days, that's okay. Well, why would it be okay? Is people getting together with one another, is that a bad thing or not? Let's look at Peter Hitchens' Sunday column in the Sunday Mail. Can a COVID virus move only one way through a mask? Can it go both in and out? Because if it can go both ways, we now know that all this mask wearing is an almost complete waste of time. Barely noticed in any major media, a serious Danish trial of the effectiveness of masks finally reported its findings on Wednesday. 3 major scientific journals, shame on them, had refused to publish it. One can only guess why. The Danes did it properly. They recruited almost 5,000 people. Half wore masks of rather better quality than the sort mainly worn in Britain. Half didn't. All lived normal lives. They kept it up for a month. At the end, 1.8% of mask wearers tested positive, and 2.1% of the unmasked tested positive for COVID. In other words, there was almost no difference. Everyone's been very careful to say it didn't measure whether wearing a mask protected others, not directly. But I'd say that unless masks and viruses are both one-directional, the answer is pretty clear. Yet with this kind of thin evidence for masks, our government still threatens non-wearers with tyrannical, ruinous fines of up to £6,400. And besides the slim difference, statistical static, between 1.8% and 2.1%, this study did not examine the possible bad health consequences of wearing a mask itself. So unless that is rolled in to the data, and if it is rolled into the data, I think we'll find out that wearing masks are worse than useless. Jonathan Barr at Lockdown Skeptics. A careful and limited Christmas. Ministers from all the UK nations met yesterday to agree plans for the festive period. According to the Cabinet Office, they haven't yet reached an agreement, although it tried to spin this as progress. Remember when we were told, back in February or March, that we weren't supposed to touch our faces? Oh, no, I can't touch your faces anymore. Really? Not going to touch your face? Okay. How is that? Do you touch, maybe you could, give yourself electric shocks every time you touch your face so you'd stop doing that. What Brits can do this Christmas, this is according to the London Sun, is believed a limited number of households will be able to meet up indoors, including at the pub. This effectively scraps the rule of 6 over the 5-day period. The relaxed rules will likely come in on Christmas Eve through to the bank holiday on December 28th. All 4 UK governments are working on a plan that will allow Brits to travel to meet families. Social bubbles will have to be announced in advance, and social distancing is still in place, so hugs are still banned. Assuming the 4 nations can agree this Christmas bonus, are we supposed to be grateful? As the Mail on Sunday's political columnist Dan Hodges said, yes, and I already quoted what he had to say. Once again, the hospitality industry is to bear the brunt of COVID restrictions after the national lockdown ends December the 2nd. According to the Telegraph, hospitality businesses in Tier 3 will only be allowed to offer takeaways, while those in Tier 2 will only to be able to serve alcohol with substantial meals. The measures, which are significantly tougher than under the previous tier system, were described as catastrophic by pub chiefs on Sunday night, with a warning that 1 million jobs are now on the line. While there is bad news for pubs, other restrictions will be lighter than under the old tier system. All shops will be allowed to open in all tiers, together with gyms and places of worship, while recreational sport, including golf, tennis, and organized team sports, can resume. Cinemas will be allowed to reopen in tiers 1 and 2, and the advice to work from home if you can't will remain across the country. Pubs in Britain have been in trouble for quite some time, largely because of the increase in property values, which makes the rents and leases prohibitively expensive, leading to prohibitively expensive pints of beer in the pub. A fascinating habit grown up over the last decade or so, that people buy their cheap booze from Tesco, say. They get hammered at home, then they go to the pub, for a pint. So we've had, for more than half a year, a situation where you can't go to the pub. Well, maybe you can go to the pub, but you social distancing. Obviously, a lot of people have stopped going entirely, and in situations like that, if these lockdowns ever end, a lot of these people will not go back to pubs again, in the same way that a lot of people are never going to return to movie theaters. Several readers have drawn our attention to a new government scheme which enjoys the backing of the former Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt. Britons are said to be given COVID freedom passes as long as they test negative for the virus twice in a week, it has been suggested. The details of the scheme are still being ironed out in Whitehall, who hope it will allow the country to get back to normal next year. To earn the Freedom Pass, people will need to be tested regularly, and provided the results come back negative, then they will be given a letter, card, or document that they can show to people as they move around. The certificate would be stored on a phone, according to sources, and would allow people to live a relatively normal life until the government's vaccination program gets up to speed. It would even allow Britons to get away without wearing a mask, it is thought, and visit family and friends without the need to socially distance. A source told The Telegraph they will allow someone to wander down the streets, and if someone else asks why they are not wearing a mask, they can show the card, letter, or app. The connotations of such a scheme are, of course, pretty grisly. Aren't we supposed to be free-born citizens living in a liberal democracy? Why should we have to earn our freedom every 2 days? It is worth remembering that Brits were carrying their wartime ID cards until 1952, and I can add to that food rationing lasted in Britain until 1954. Let's catch up with Alex Berenson from yesterday. Stop telling yourself it's temporary. It's been almost a year. Stop thinking it's a public health emergency. The hospitals are fine. Stop pretending you don't know what's next. They're telling you. Stand up for your rights or lose them. Laura Ingraham had tweeted, now that their mask mania has proved fruitless, they're just making stuff up. Former FDA commissioner urges Americans to buy better masks. Berenson comments, because N95s are so easy to wear, people will gladly wear them 12 hours a day and cost effective. At $250 a mask, good luck finding them for that price. American adults would spend $4 billion a week to make Scott happy. I guess Mikey B could subsidize for a couple of weeks. It's not a game. It's the only way we have a chance against the steamroller. And I'm sometimes wrong in my predictions, very occasionally make mistakes, but I never say anything that I don't think is true and don't have data to back. Oh, who is this fellow? Hi, Alex. In case you missed it, Brian Leiter is apparently reading your Twitter feed and is discussing it on his philosophy blog. He just called you the world's sick, dumbest journalist. I think this may be responding to in some form, if you have time, for better or worse. This is probably the most widely read philosophy blog in the world, and every philosophy professor and grad student I know reads this. Keep up the terrific work. Berenson responds, oh no, the world's most widely read philosophy professor is after me. Whatever shall I do. Turn the heat up here. Just hang on a second. I had a viewing of this place just before the show started, which always makes me quite nervous because, they're supposed to be out by 4, but I don't know whether they're actually going to adhere to that rule. And of course, I don't know whether they're going to show up on time because quite often they don't. I don't know. It's a bit, every time that people come over to look at the place, I have to, clean it up and put things away. And I don't know, I spent about 3 hours doing that today. I made quite possibly a big mistake, which was a bath mat in the bathroom. It's fuzzy on top, and it's got some sort of, plastic undercoating or rubber or something like that. And, I thought this needs to be washed. So I washed it, and then I noticed that all the stuff on the back, the rubber coating or whatever, which had already begun to come off, had come off in a very big way. And when I put the clothes in the dryer, it literally produced cups of this stuff. Yeah, that's how much came off. And all the rest of my clothing was inundated with these little yellow balls of rubber. So I had to wash everything all over again. Let's talk about the election, which remains still disputed, despite what the media would have you think. But first, we'll go to the chat. Okay. Because the mat was made in China, says Metal Mike. It could be. I didn't check to see. I've noticed that these bath mats lately, they don't have that, the rubber undercoating or whatever, plastic undercoating, for the obvious reason that if you wash and dry the thing, bad things happen. Okay. Shogokin 666 says, "Oh boy, the marijuana smell begins." I don't know what that is in reference to. There's a whole bunch of people. One, that's their comment. Palcazo 88 says, "How long until the American economy collapses after Biden takes office?" I'm going to be talking about that shortly. Earl Pipe, jails emptied of prisons to accommodate safe family holiday visiting. Anrun says, "Stand up for your rights in this banana republic where presidential elections are blatantly stolen." Hello, Eche Lux. Oh, press 1 if you're tired of pretending. Okay. Chokokin 666 says, "The oceans will have vast archipelagos of discarded masks." Yeah, I mentioned this last week. I forget who had made this observation, that these masks are supposed to be biohazards. So why there's no centralized collection of the used masks? 3 freedom passes can be turned in for a temporary Independence weekend, says PK Teller. Now I crave shepherd's pie, says Chogokin 666. Eche Lux says, "If UK cops start disappearing..." Okay, yeah, all in Minecraft. Yeah, okay, I know the joke. No, I think that England is pretty close to a revolutionary situation. I really think they are. It is not good when a substantial minority, perhaps a majority of the populace, views the police as their enemy. Tom Anderson says, "KMG, I went to the gas station and didn't wear a mask when I went in. Masks are mandatory now in all indoor places in British Columbia. I don't know whether this means where I live." It seems a little confusing about that. But I had to go downstairs to let the people who were looking the place over in. And I went down in a hurry because it was 20 to 4, and I forgot my mask. And these people were foreigners, but I heard them talking in their foreign language, and they seemed to be noted the fact that I wasn't wearing a mask, and I don't know whether they were amazed or alarmed by this. Anyway, back to the election. From Josh Dawsey in the Washington Post, analysis: notoriously noisy president goes relatively quiet in wake of election defeat. And there's a picture of him playing golf at the Trump National Golf Course in Sterling, Virginia on Saturday. Since Donald Trump was declared the election's loser last month, gone are blustery speeches and stem-whiner White House news conferences about the coronavirus, which never disappeared like he promised, or any other topic for that matter. Gone are lengthy call-in sessions with favorite Fox anchors that often stretched so long that the hosts had to push to conclude the calls. Gone too are regular White House jousting matches with the press, impromptu Oval Office appearances with random guests, or any pretense of being interested in many of the duties of the job. Oh, any pretense. Okay. In the 19 days since the election, 12 have included no events on the president's schedule. He has appeared at public events 4 times and has played golf at his Virginia course 6 times. He has taken no questions from reporters. I don't know. Maybe he's got something up his sleeve. Donald Trump tweets, I want to thank Emily Murphy at GSA for her steadfast dedication and loyalty to our country. She has been harassed, threatened, and abused, and I do not want to see this happen to her, her family, or employees of GSA. Our case strongly continues. We will keep up the good fight, and I believe we will prevail. Nevertheless, in the best interests of our country, I'm recommending that Emily and her team do what needs to be done with regard to initial protocols, and have told my team to do the same. Here is Jim Kunstler this morning. Talking Turkey. Only a few years ago, the nation seemed sturdy enough that its very existence would not be called to question. Now, not so much. In 2016, the elite blue coastal oligarchy was too smugly self-satisfied with correctness in all things, especially its right to power, to bother rigging the election beyond the usual urban ward-level hijinks in the usual places. But then Hillary lost to Trump via the inside straight of his bagging the swing states' electoral votes without winning the national popular vote. They sure weren't going to let that happen again. And thus the weird spectacle this time of wee hour vote tallying suspensions, followed by improbable ballot pump and dumps in favor of old white Joe Biden, the most inert, empty, uncharismatic presidential candidate ever conjured by any conclave of scheming Kabbalists in U.S. history. Next to Joe Biden, Warren G. Harding was an American Augustus. And so the 2020 vote was rigged to the rafters just to make sure that the outcome this time would bend towards the Democrats' beloved arc of justice. The legal battle over that brazen theft has incited some exciting fighting phases, mostly coming from freelance attorney Sidney Powell, an informal adjunct to the president's official lawyers, Jenna Ellis and Rudy Giuliani. Ms. Powell has promised to release the Kraken and blow up Georgia in a biblical firestorm of fatal writs, fixing to overturn the results of this election, leaving us early this week in the spooky eye of post-election Sturm und Drang, with the real action yet to come. The president and the RNC lost a bunch of state court cases the past week, and naturally that discouraged the pro-Trump troops across red America, which is mostly everything between Hackensack and Fresno. But these weak pleadings might have been designed to simply speed the process through the states so as to get the main arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court, namely that the foreign-owned Dominion vote tabulation company was pre-programmed to overcome any Trump lead, that the Dominion software was originally created to queer elections and indeed used many times to do just that in foreign lands, and that U.S. election officials with their poll worker grunts in select states connived to cover the fraud with as many unverifiable write-in votes as the job required. And then evidence as proof. If the SCOTUS agrees to hear the case, a big if, they may be extremely reluctant to rule affirmatively because, one, they'll be venturing into a poorly mapped constitutional frontier, and two, the recent confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett installing a conservative supermajority on the court will look as much like a setup to the blue staters as the Dominion vote fraud looks like a setup to the Reds. But then, if the case is strong enough, SCOTUS does have the legal prerogative to decertify state elections, sinking both candidates below the 270 electoral vote mark and rolling the giant reeking hairball into the House of Representatives, where Trump would enjoy a distinct advantage. Cue Antifa and Black Lives Matters. It's not exactly what further evidence Powell and the president's lawyers will bring to the SCOTUS beyond what has already surfaced on the internet, which is pretty eyebrow-raising. The news media has made a big show of calling for it and cavilling loudly when the lawyers say they're holding back until the court is ready to entertain the case. It's hard to imagine that Powell and Giuliani would sacrifice their reputations on some kind of bluff. Anyway, what's to bluff in this game? I don't believe this trio would bring a wiffle bat to a gunfight. One result of these final innings, Jim Kunstler writes, in the contest will be the delegitimizing of old white Joe Biden as president. Should his forces finally prevail, half of America will not only refuse to buy it, but it will incite a counter-resistance on the right as determined as Hillary's pussy hat brigades and bureaucrat activists of the post-2016 era, and possibly more bloodthirsty, especially if the left makes a move to confiscate guns. The prospect of Joe Biden functioning as president is a joke anyway. Have you forgotten his non-campaign campaign? The empty parking lots with the white circles, the pitiful gaffes? And lurking in this fog of war is all that odious monkey business selling influence abroad involving crackhead son Hunter and the rest of the Biden family. Think that's going away? What you'd actually get with a Biden victory is a deep state junta of malicious, coercive, and vengeance-crazed characters such as John Brennan, Andrew Weissman, Nancy Pelosi, Susan Rice, and Adam Schiff, with Barack Obama hovering somewhere backstage, commanding this and that. Even if President Old White Joe is shoved aside on account of mental incompetence, leaving Kamala Harris in the Oval Office to giggle through the next 4 years, while she orchestrates a junior high school mean girl style campaigns against the enemies of wokesterdom. The DC blob has demonstrated that it doesn't need no stinking president to work its wicked will. Meanwhile, have a lovely home alone Thanksgiving if you are dutifully following the orders of Governors Cuomo, Pritzker, Whitmer, Murphy, and Newsom. We'll dare to have 7 at table here and therefore not to eat some reincarnation of turkey for 3 weeks afterward. As a holiday bonus, I leave you with a little burlesque submitted by a reader wishing to remain anonymous for your amusement as follows. From the Party Secretariat for COVID-19 Affairs. Party bans manufacture, distribution, and possession of turkeys weighing more than 9 pounds. Measure combats the spread of COVID-19 at large gatherings. Dateline, Washington, D.C. The party announced today an emergency ban on the manufacture, distribution, and possession of holiday turkeys weighing more than 9 pounds, effective immediately. The common sense new measure is required to combat the spread of COVID-19 during the upcoming holidays. Large turkeys encourage gatherings of family and friends. These groups are known to congregate in private homes to engage in conversation, laughter, and religious observances such as the saying of grace. Activities like these pose a grave threat to our collective safety, said party spokesperson Gretchen Whitmer. We encourage Americans of all genders to celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday alone in a dark room, streaming the Lions game on their iPhone, Whitmer added. And there's more, but you can go to Jim Kunstler's column at kunstler.com for the rest of it. And I'm at VDare here, looking at the sad face of Jake Tapper. This is from Lance Welton. Network television used to love conflict, and the more acrimonious and hate-filled, the better. As pack animals, humans are fascinated by intense disagreements, especially between their leaders and by fights in general. So intense political conflict means more viewers and more ad revenue. But clearly, this doesn't apply to the disputed Trump-Biden election. All the mainstream media has adopted the narrative that Biden is the president-elect, essentially ignoring the conflict happening behind the scenes, rendering their broadcast bland and hardly worth watching. Why? After all, you would think that the networks would be elated, able to present the U.S. as a country in crisis, on the brink of self-destruction. There could be constant, dramatic, rolling news bulletins, all of them more than paying for the commercials by which they'd be regularly interrupted. Biden supporters would ardently insist that their man won fair and square. Trump supporters would deplore the steal and insist they weren't going to give in. News networks used to live for situations like this, as they did during the Gore-Bush conflict. What happened? A key part of the answer: we live in a remarkably different world than that of the year 2000. As I have reported before, the US has suddenly become much more polarized. Modeling by Russian biologist Peter Turchin, professor of evolutionary biology at the University of Connecticut, has found that America is as polarized now as it was at the beginning of the Civil War. This has led him to predict that the 2020s will be a decade of quite incredible strife and unrest. The causes he highlights: one, an excess of workers caused by immigration and deindustrialization, leading to declining living standards. Two, intra-elite competition, the overproduction of elites, too many people with degrees to fill irrelevant jobs, leading to lots of resentful, educated people struggling for status, such as white BLM marchers violently signaling their virtue. Three, state fragility, due to the loss of financial confidence, causing more and more people to distrust the elite and turn to the extremes. Four, international environment, foreign governments helping to undermine the elite. Think of Democrat paranoia about Russia. All this has developed since the year 2000, when the economy was in superb shape, but there was no international competitor to America, and the bitter harvest of mass immigration and elite overproduction had not yet fully delivered its poisonous fruit. The result now: polarization, with each side tending to distrust intensely and even despise the other. But liberals, possibly because they specifically score higher in moral disgust, i.e. are repulsed with those who disagree with them, tend to hate and distrust conservatives even more than conservatives loathe and distrust liberals, according to research by psychologist Jonathan Haidt. To make matters worse, because of immigration policy, America has become more ethnically diverse since the year 2000, according to research by Harvard psychologist Robert Putnam. This has the effect of reducing trust. First, because the natives and the foreigners do not trust each other. Second, because the natives become paranoid that fellow natives will collaborate against them with the foreigners, reducing trust even between the natives. And then there are other more subtle demographic changes in the last 20 years: improving transport links, gentrification, greater university attendance, which permits a certain psychological type to abandon small-town America, and the rise of the internet mean that people can more easily find other people who are like themselves politically and psychologically. This results in them having less and less to do with people who are psychologically and thus politically different. In turn, they will decreasingly trust such people. I'll just interrupt to say I've noticed this trend for decades, and it is a very bad trend. Randomness in human relations is a good thing. It is a very good thing, because it means you are frequently exposed to people who are not just like you and do not share your interests, your hobbies, your prejudices, etc. You learn that you are not, in fact, the center of the universe. But back to VDARE. This process, which Charles Murray has called coming apart, is gradually dividing America. Murray voted for Joe Biden, by the way, and other Western countries who into two really separate tribes who are mutually antagonistic towards each other. In a context of extreme polarization such as this, in which some Trump supporters seem genuinely to believe that some leading Democrats are child-sacrificing pedophile Satanists, and indeed can point to the peculiar case of Jeffrey Epstein. If all this had happened 20 years ago, the MSN probably would have presented both points of view in the hope of drumming up viewers, but there would never been a candidate such as Trump in 2000 because America was so much less polarized. In 2020, we have an elite media that despises and distrusts Trump and his supporters. Oh, and here's a tweet from Matt Iglesias in 2016, responding to Ross Douthat at the New York Times and Jamel Bowie, wherever he is these days. At Slate, is he? Maybe he's at the Times too. My guess is that in a Trump administration, angry mobs will beat and murder Jews and people of color with impunity. Wow. Somehow, Matty Iglesias did not have his pundit card revoked. My guess is that in a Trump administration, angry mobs will beat and murder Jews, people of color with impunity. Was he hoping for that? Furthermore, research shows that extreme liberals also tend to be very strongly governed by emotion. They feel negative emotions far more strongly than do conservatives. They simply don't believe that the truth will out after a rational discussion. Liberals also tend to believe that people who disagree with them are less intelligent, meaning that they think they can be manipulated into violence. For example, it has been found that liberals will rate blacks as less intelligent, but only if they disagree with liberal dogmas. Barack Obama just said that the internet is the single biggest threat to our democracy. Of course, he doesn't mean the internet itself, but the politically correct information that can be found on it. To put it simply, the leftists who now control the MSN believe that some kind of civil war, in whatever form that takes in a highly technological country, might be coming, and that if they report both sides of any argument, they might trigger it. They genuinely think the Cossacks are coming, and America is so polarized that they may well be right. Well, that's kind of rather distressing, isn't it? Cossacks? Of course, I always believe that Cossacks are coming. My great-great-grandfather left Odessa in 1881 after the assassination of the Tsar. Yeah, and what does that have to do with America or Canada? You still going on about that? Let's see. We're going to get into Sidney Powell here. Jay Valentine, whose articles have greatly impressed me at the American Thinker, has one today: Why Industrial Scale Fraud is Just So Hard to Hide. People, we need to talk. Way too many are caught in the media-induced despondency, knowing the presidential election was stolen in the dark of night. Vote counting suddenly stopped. Vote counts on the television switched from Trump to Biden, yet each thinks he or she is the only one who saw it. Why do I feel so alone? Nobody can hide industrial scale fraud of any sort for long. Medicaid fraud, stock manipulation, fake invoices. The bigger the fraud, the harder it is to hide, and thus the greater probability it's all going to come out. The words, "This would be the crime of the century," will likely be Tucker Carlson's "Read My Lips, no new taxes" a year from now. Let's talk about industrial level fraud. It's all over the place. Our teams uncovered some of the largest Medicaid fraud rings in the country. Doctors, attorneys, chiropractors, groups of recent immigrants, all living in the same apartment building in Paterson, New Jersey. These connections were one of the largest swoop and squat insurance frauds ever discovered. We broke the largest internet auction fraud in history and built the technology that enabled a major tech company to determine that Mary Jones was actually Sam McCarthy and Stephen Sims, even though they had not a single field in common. We know a bit about industrial scale fraud. So do a lot of people. Remember Bernie Madoff? He was able to defraud some of the greatest talents in America for decades because he was just a charming guy, or so they said. Yeah, because they were greedy, because they were revoltingly greedy. If an investment advisor tells you that he can give you a 25% return on investment every year without fail, he is, one, lying to you, and two, a crook. A crook. Oh, we mentioned Elizabeth Holmes, who founded Theranos, a Silicon Valley company, who created a machine to spin straw into gold, or more accurately, a machine that take a pinprick of blood and diagnose scores of diseases or conditions. Elizabeth Holmes was far more colorful than Bernie Madoff, always being photographed in a black turtleneck with the remarkable blue eyes and blonde hair. Her hair was terrible. It was just blown out all over the place. I noticed she's modeling a very different look now that she's about to argue that she suffers from some sort of mental illness, which makes her not guilty of her crimes. The insanity was Theranos' board of directors: Henry Kissinger, William Perry, former Secretary of Defense, Mad Dog Jim Mattis, remember him? And rounding out the team with a core Republican, meet George Shultz. Shultz turned against his own, grandson? For pointing out the obvious problems with Theranos. Seems you don't have to be that good looking a woman to turn heads in Silicon Valley. What is important is, in both examples, is that smart people who should have known better denied the fraud even when an outside person showed it back to them in black and white. Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and their team are pulling a bunch of threads, starting points. When things start to fall apart, they cascade. First a few clues come in, then a bunch, then everything comes loose. In the early day, which is now, there is a human tendency for many to not believe their lying eyes. The media, all in on this, promote that the Liz and Bernie equivalents are nice people. There's no proof of fraud. That's what Makarpolis and Carrie Yu heard too. Witnesses were threatened. Attorneys attacked for probing. Carreyrou saw a bit of that, even after Carreyrou, is a Wall Street Journal reporter, published his first story about Theranos fraud. The management of his newspaper had Liz at one of their events. This is how this stuff works. In the end, which is not far out, it all comes apart. It always does. Industrial scale fraud is not sustainable because lies that big just cannot be hidden. Sidney Powell and Linwood aren't going away. Get some sleep. What does Vox Day have to say? Oh, okay, boomer, he writes. Rush Limbaugh's booming about bombshells is because he doesn't understand what the various legal teams are telling everyone. Limbaugh recalled that Team Trump seemed like they were about to release devastating evidence for their legal case, but the radio host was underwhelmed. The evidence is devastating. We know the programmer who developed the vote stealing routine. We know the Serbian team that programmed the software. We know what companies were involved and where their servers were located. We know the algorithm. We can replicate the vote totals as they were recorded. We can match the vote switching to the data feed that went out to the media networks with the recordings of the media broadcasts. But Rush is underwhelmed because he's a boomer who doesn't know how to use his iPhone, has absolutely no clue about what any of all this means, even though lawyers have boiled it down to the simple, most possible explanation. Millions of Trump votes were shifted to Biden by voting machine software. It's infuriating that these media morons, A, won't accept the simple statement without evidence, then B, reject the evidence because it's too complicated for them. Oh, DuckDuckGo is selling data to Google. Okay. That's a shame. And, oh, yes, lies and more lies. Again, from Vox Day. When you deal enough with lawyers, you learn how they lie through omission and misdirection. See if you can spot the lies here. Against false statements, the facts. Smartmatic does not own Dominion voting systems and has never provided Dominion with any technology. Smartmatic has never had any ties with any government or political group anywhere in the world. See, Smartmatic has never provided Dominion with any technology because Dominion provided the technology to Smartmatic. Yeah. Yes, a private investment group sold Sequoia and its technology to Dominion. Sequoia was a California-based company that's one of the largest providers of electronic voting systems in the U.S., having offices in Oakland, Denver, and New York City. Some of its major competitors were Premier Election Solutions, formerly Diebold, and Election Systems and Software. It was acquired by the Canadian company Dominion Voting Systems on June the 4th, 2010. In other words, there was a cutout, which doesn't even truly qualify as a third party due to the fact that it was led by Sequoia's management team that allows Smartmatic to deceptively claim it never provided the technology directly to Dominion, even though Dominion now owns the technology that Smartmatic formerly owned. And note that Dominion Voting Systems is a Canadian company, thereby confirming the fact of foreign interference in U.S. elections. We're having a lot of lawyers doxxed and threatened, including by a group called the Lincoln Project, which I guess is very much in the spirit of President Lincoln. Law firm Kirkland & Ellis, this is again from Christina Layla, a busy woman at Gateway Pundit. Law firm Kirkland & Ellis withdrew from representing Pennsylvania Secretary of State Kathy Boockvar on Friday. Trump's lawyers have been harassed and threatened for the crime of representing the President of the United States. Last week, the anti-American hacks at the Lincoln Project doxed and harassed two of President Trump's presidential lawyers, prompting them to withdraw from a voter fraud case. Last weekend, one of President Trump's lawyers had her life threatened after she filed a civil rights lawsuit to ensure a clean election in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia lawyer Linda Kearns said it in a Sunday night court filing that she was harassed and threatened by a lawyer working for Kirkland and Ellis. Since this case was filed, undersigned counsel has been subjected to continuous harassment in the form of abusive emails, phone calls, physical and economic threats, and even accusations of treason, all for representing the President of the United States, wrote Kearns in her filing. On November 14th at 8:43 a.m., an attorney at Kirkland & Ellis left a 1-minute voicemail for undersigned counsel. The voicemail, which has been provided to counsel of record from Kirkland & Ellis in this case and will be provided to the court via email upon request, speaks for itself and by any measure falls afoul of standards of professional conduct. Christopher Bedford writes in The Federalist on Friday, Trump campaign lawyer Sidney Powell told the Blaze's Glenn Beck, our forces have confiscated a voting company server in Germany linked to the alleged pro-Joe Biden fraud committed by Dominion Voting Systems. Both the military and the voting company in question have denied this claim. On Saturday, Powell said Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp and his Secretary of State are in on the Dominion scam and that they ought to be investigated for financial benefit received about that time. On Sunday, President Donald Trump lawyers Giuliani and Ellis released an official statement disassociating Powell from the campaign's effort. This came as news to every single person watching, including those still involved in Trump's re-election campaign. When Frank Luntz, a TV gadfly and Republican pollster, pointed out how difficult it is to accept this late in the game distancing, Ellis accused him of having a micro penis. Election fraud is not just a real issue, it is a deadly serious one to the future of our country. Original reporting of The Federalist and a number of other outlets has unearthed sprawling voter distrust born of firsthand experience with fraud after fraud after fraud in major Democratic machine cities. It simply isn't the dead voting, the living's votes counting for candidates they did not vote for, and voters who didn't even cast ballots counting for candidates they did not vote for. It's difficult to impossible to unscramble mail-in ballots coming in after legal deadlines and counting anyway. It's a systematic barring of supervision and oversight. It's judges rewriting legal voting laws in the name of mass COVID-19 hysteria. The Trump campaign legal team needs to stop the TV and Twitter theater, and pretending Powell was never really there isn't remotely going to cut it. Okay, so Sidney Powell makes charges against the governor of Georgia, Secretary of State. Maybe the charges are true. There's always that possibility. Why would the governor of Georgia act like this? Why would the Secretary of State of Georgia act like this? Kemp almost lost 2 years ago. You know, he's facing a situation where the Republicans will never win a statewide office in the state of Georgia again. And he seems to be perfectly happy with that he's the governor, not Stacey Abrams, but he's acting as if Stacey Abrams is not only the governor, but a dictator of the state of Georgia. Snarky piece by Eric Wemple in the Washington Post. Hey, MAGA folks, don't bail on Tucker. Yes. So we know that there was unpleasantness between the attorney, Sidney Powell, and Tucker Carlson, with Powell accusing Carlson of being peremptory and rude. But it's not over yet. It's not over yet. Sidney Powell was suspended from Twitter for 12 hours, supposedly, allegedly, for linking to a story, which I'll read out the URL to you. It is gnews, gnews.org/577635. And it is called The Link Between Dominion, Sequoia, Smartmatic, and the Chinese Communist Party. Yes, this picture of Jack Dorsey again at Breitbart. This was new Dostoevsky look, although I don't think that anyone in Dostoevsky's time, except for gypsies, wore rings through their noses. General Flynn tweeted, Sidney Powell has been suspended from Twitter for 12 hours. She understands the White House press release and agrees with it. She is staying the course to prove the massive deliberate election fraud that robbed we the people of our votes for President Trump and other Republican candidates. Yes, staying the course. Sidney Powell released a statement and signs off hashtag Kraken on steroids. So yes, Trump, he often has people working for him who are not officially working for him. We can see this all the way back to 2015. There's nothing new about that from him. Nothing new at all. Let's see. Yes, it's not what you think. Sidney Powell is practicing law on her own. She is not a member of the Trump legal team. She is also not a lawyer for the president in his personal capacity. This is from Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis. And yes, I'm not really disturbed by this, not at all. General Michael Flynn's son, Mike Jr., followed up with a message tonight on Parlay, noting that the earlier message from the president's team is not a reflection of any misstatements on Sidney's part. And David Soloway, an American thinker, inveighs against what he calls the capitulation conservatives, which is pretty much all of them. Again, don't call yourself conservative, because conservatives are losers by design. Steve Watson at Summit News. Twitter says it will make Biden POTUS regardless of election outcome. I've been joking for several weeks that America no longer needs an electoral college because it has Twitter. But I should know better than to make such jokes, because it's now true. The platform announced that it is actively preparing to support the transition of White House institutional Twitter accounts on January 20th, 2021. The accounts Twitter says it will hand over to Biden include at White House, at VP, at FLOTUS, and several other handles related to official government positions. Twitter also announced that its representatives will be meeting with members of Biden's transition team in the coming weeks to discuss the handover. Is that really necessary? Twitter, which has actively censored Trump's posts while blocking news regarding Joe Biden's potentially disqualifying dodgy business dealings, says it will reset the POTUS account on Inauguration Day. I don't know, is Jack and the Twitter team, are they looking for thanks from the Biden campaign? They certainly deserve thanks, because you could hardly ask Twitter to have done any more than it did on behalf of Joe Biden. So let's run through some stories of, a short piece by Angelo Codevilla at American Greatness. The Trump campaign alleges that massive voter fraud, especially perpetrated by computer software, is responsible for the widely published figures indicating Joe Biden won the presidential election. Consensus has spread from the left through the Republican establishment, e.g. the Wall Street Journal, to honest Tucker Carlson, that the Trump team has presented no proof, and absent that must concede. But even the few who adhere to that consensus honestly do so based on neglect of law, facts, and even of the English language. For Trump's highly paid lawyers, there is no excuse whatsoever to submit to that expectation. What follows is a dose of remedial reality. Pay attention. Fraud and its general methodology was generally expected in this election. The Democrats' successful demands for mail-in voting, which divorces millions of ballots from the individuals who may or may not have cast them, and simultaneously from the lists of registered voters, and the counting thereof by computers programmed and possibly reprogrammed out of sight of competing monitors, guaranteed that fraud could happen and that ordinary recounts could not prove that it happened. But the method and circumstances of 2020 could not and did not erase all evidence that presidential election fraud might have and probably did happen. The Trump campaign has produced various affidavits and pointed to methods and circumstances that raise suspicion, e.g., batches of ballots being run through machines multiple times and recording operations being shielded from observation by the erection of barriers and the removal of observers. Various other researchers have reported facts that raise vital questions about wholesale machine fraud. Who programmed the Dominion voting systems in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin? Can those who did so and operated the systems on or after November 3rd show convincingly that the number of votes they reported relate to choices made by real persons that correspond to names on lists of registered voters? Why is the discrepancy between results in the down ballot races and the presidential race so great? What did the ballot dumps that did so much to change the presidential race do with regard to the other races? None of this proves systemic machine fraud big enough to change the reported results, but neither are these facts irrelevant to the question. Now, black letter law. The Trump campaign are plaintiffs. They have no obligation to prove anything. nor do they have the power to subpoena things, documents, and persons, nor to compel testimony that might be dispositive regarding the sufficiency of fraud. Nor do they have the right to adjudicate disputes any more than the press has the right or power to do so. The plaintiff's only burden is to establish in the minds of persons who are empowered by law to subpoena evidence, compel testimony, etc., with what the semi-sacred words of American law call probable cause that fraud may have been committed. These persons are courts, principally federal, as well as state legislatures that possess investigative powers, as well as the U.S. Justice Department. These institutions, other than justice, are also the only ones that have the right to decide what constitutes sufficient proof of what. The Trump campaign has spoken in ways that suggest it can prove fraud. It cannot, nor as a matter of law, nor, given its lack of subpoena powers and compulsive power, can it do so as a matter of fact. Giving that impression, it has tended to discourage the people who should be seized by their duty to follow probable cause of fraud, and there is plenty of that. The courts historically have been as partisan and as corrupt parts of the establishment as any other. Like others, they tend to decide without giving reason or trying to convince. But there is a hierarchy in courts. At the top, the Supreme Court is under the greatest pressure to rule in a manner that tries to convince Americans that justice is being done. Usually, the Supreme Court refuses to act as a trial court, but dictates a result by telling the relevant lower courts to review the case according to criteria it specifies. Other times, it has decided a similar case, Bush versus Gore, more directly by deciding who has jurisdiction to do what and who does not. In the present case, yes, the Supreme Court can effectively validate or invalidate millions of numbers of votes, but it must try to give convincing reasons. The country needs convincing reasons for accepting or rejecting these numbers. Why the establishment fears or finds irrelevant and hence opposes that is understandable. What is not understandable is why figures such as Sidney Powell and Tucker Carlson are not focusing on the relationship that American law commands between evidence, proof, and power. They should be focused instead on dealing with abundant probable cause. Jared Peterson at American Thinker says that, points out that Trump is waiting. Either Powell and Giuliani find a court in which they can lay out the proof they claim to have, or failing that, they lay it out publicly. At that point, that task accomplished, Trump has to go public in a big way. And the way that makes most sense to me is in successive rallies in the critical states that were stolen, beginning in the state, whichever it is, where the proof is most compelling, and then moving on to the other four. Victor Davis Hanson in American Greatness describes this as a time of chaos upon chaos atop chaos. There is a series of battles to come in January 2020, in 2022, and in 2024 that will be definitive if the chaos of 2020 does not become even more chaotic. The media has now vanished, kaput, no more, ended, he writes. Within a few hours, it goes from Ministry of Truth love session with Joe Biden to a steaming verbal assault on the president's press secretary without a shred of awareness how ridiculous they appear in their passive-aggressive schizophrenia. The only constant is that reporters unapologetically seem to jettison their principles and professionalism to calibrate what they say and do by whose politics they support. They would prefer to be entirely discredited under a Biden presidency than be real journalists during a Trump administration. Yes, and someone called Pede on the internet has been looking into this question of votes switched from Trump to Biden and of votes lost, thrown away, mostly votes for Trump. And my own, this is Nick Chase, analyses to detect imaginary votes added for Biden. I've decided to continue examining states where everylegalvote.com says ballot fraud occurred in the 2020 presidential election. Pede identified two states, Virginia and Minnesota, where there were hundreds of thousands of votes lost, a sure indicator of fraud. Even those states' votes are not being recounted, nor are there legal challenges. From CBS in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania Supreme Court rules certain mail-in ballots without declaration dates may be counted. Because you want to count every vote. You don't want to subject these votes to too much scrutiny. There could be civil rights considerations there, I suppose. From the Hill, Pennsylvania Republicans sue in last-ditch efforts to stop election certification. From Just the News, Trump scores 2 wins as Michigan legislature, federal appeals court agree to election reviews. This from 4:06 p.m. Eastern Time. The developments were announced by Trump campaign senior legal counsel Jenna Ellis, who said that the GOP-led Michigan House will hold its hearing at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. We are confident that they will share the same concerns once they see the extent of the outright fraud and disregard for the law that happened in Michigan across the nation. Every American should want to know the truth. Michigan certifies Joe Biden's election victory, says NPR this afternoon. A funny story from The Federalist by Tristan Justice. Former Vice President Biden isn't used to getting real questions on Friday. He appeared dumbfounded as to why a reporter was asking the projected Democratic presidential-elect a question as the press pool was being scurried away by staff. Mr. Biden, the COVID task force said it's safe for students to be in class. Are you going to encourage unions to cooperate more to bring kids back to classrooms, sir? Asked CBS reporter Bo Exton. Why are you the only guy who always shouts out questions? Biden said. It was a bizarre episode for the 78-year-old Democrat who enjoyed the least amount of media scrutiny on the campaign trail of any modern candidate running for president. While serious revelations were emerging revealing Biden's role in his son's potentially criminal overseas business dealings, reporters asked hard-hitting questions such as what kind of ice cream Biden purchased at a pit stop. Erickson was also one of the few reporters to ask Biden about the scandals plaguing his campaign, bombshells suppressed by big tech and either ignored or dubiously delegitimized by other mainstream outlets. When pressed on the issue, Biden lashed out at the media. I asked Joe Biden, this is from Bo Exton at CBS, what is your response to the New York Post story about your son, sir? He called it a smear campaign, and they went after me. Quote, I knew you'd ask it. I have no response. It's another smear campaign right up your alley. Those are the questions you always asked. I thought Joe Biden was supposed to be the nice guy. He was supposed to be the anti-Trump. Well, no, obviously he's not. Obviously he's not. As Steve Saylor points out, Trump and Joe Biden have a lot in common, specifically that they tend to say what they're thinking, no matter how harsh that might be. Let's look at J5 killer. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted, President Trump's recount starts tomorrow here in Georgia. I am now a certified ballot monitor. We'll be doing an audit, checking signatures, and doing a full recount. And Breather commented on that, going to flip Georgia and bust this thing open. Myth Informed tweets, the piles of the Milwaukee County ballots up for legal objection continue to grow. The board will start to review these soon. There was only one full 8-foot table an hour ago. Now there are 2 and more keep coming in. President-elect Cynthia at Chaos Universe tweeted, reminder, Trump hasn't conceded and Kamala hasn't resigned her Senate seat yet. Rex Trump tweeted, Trump didn't do 5 rallies a day just to roll over for some schmuck who hid in his basement while he had the election stolen for him. Trump is going to fight. He's going to win. J5 Killer says, you got a choice. You can lay down like a beaten dog or you can stand up on your hind legs and fight like a man. So let's talk about the Pope. Pope woke, or anti-Pope Francis, as I like to call him. This is from ABC News this afternoon. NBA players hailed by Pope at Vatican for demanding justice. 5 NBA players have met with Pope Francis at the Vatican to discuss social justice. And yes, Pope Francis met with NBA players at the Vatican on Monday, lauding them as champions and saying he supported their work on social justice. The 5 players, Marco Bellinelli, Sterling Brown, Jonathan Isaac, Kyle Korver, and Anthony Tolliver, were joined in the delegation by NBA Players Union Executive Director Michelle Roberts and two other union executives, Sherry Deans and Matteo Zaretti. We're here because, frankly, we're inspired by the work that you do globally, Roberts told the Pope. The union said the players spoke about their individual and collective efforts addressing social and economic injustice and inequality occurring in their communities. Bellinelli addressed the Pope in Italian, and the group presented the Pope with a commemorative basketball, a union-produced book highlighting efforts players have taken, and an Orlando Magic jersey. You're champions, the Pope said, but also giving the example of teamwork, you've become a model, giving that good example of teamwork, but always remaining humble. NBA players, humble, and preserving your own humanity. The audience was held days before a book comes out in which Francis supports demands for racial justice, specifically the actions taken following the killing of George Floyd, a black man who died in May. Police officer in Minneapolis pressed a knee against his neck for minutes while Floyd said he couldn't breathe. Well, he was saying he couldn't breathe even before that happened, and the autopsy does not support the conclusion that it was this knee that caused Floyd's death, because he was high as a kite on fentanyl and many other drugs. I was there to support my colleagues in their daily struggle in the United States, and not just for that, Bellinelli said later Monday on Twitter. I also went to show that athletes have an active responsibility in society and need to dedicate themselves towards changing things that don't work. The Pope had important words for us. The key is to remain humble. Again, NBA players, the humblest men on earth. Okay. Oh, the delegation did not wear masks during his papal visit. The union later said the group was required to undergo COVID-19 testing before meeting the Pope and followed other Vatican protocols. Last month, the Pope halted his public general audiences amid a surge of coronavirus cases in Italy and the Vatican. So about this book, Nicole Dara, New York reporter for the U.S. version of the London Sun, writes, Pope Francis appears to compare President Donald Trump's rallies to Hitler's and praised Black Lives Matter reforms in his new book. Black Lives Matter reforms? What might they be? In the Pope's 150-page book, set to be released December 1st, he supports demands for racial justice in the wake of Floyd's police murder last May. Murder, is it? That's a pretty bold claim. Has not been proved to be murder. Isn't this the sort of thing that Twitter should be flagging? Because murder does not mean the same thing as killing. No, it does not. The Pope also blasted COVID skeptics and the news media that spread conspiracies in the book, which was penned during the Vatican's coronavirus lockdown. In parts of Let Us Dream, it appears as though Francis is directing a message directly at the United States. Without identifying the U.S. or Trump by name, Francis singled out Christian majority countries, boo, where nationalist populist leaders seek to defend Christianity from perceived enemies. Today, listening to some of the populist leaders we now have, I'm reminded of the 1930s, when some democracies collapsed into dictatorships seemingly overnight, Francis writes. We see it happening now again in rallies where populist leaders excite and harangue crowds, channeling the resentments and hatreds against imagined enemies to distract from the real problems. One could make that very same accusation against Jorge Bergoglio, that he is nothing more than a cheap demagogue. The Pope wrote that people fall for this type of rhetoric out of fear rather than true religious conviction. You know, Bergoglio is pretty much at the point now where he's saying that there's only one real Catholic in the world. Guess who? Me. Yeah, that would be me. All the rest of you, particularly you people who delight in, prayers, traditional prayers, traditional forms, you people aren't real Catholics at all. Francis also addressed Floyd's death earlier this year. His death sparked mass protests, rioting, actually, plunder, and ultimately a greater movement in support of the lives of Black people. That's why they are dropping like flies in America's big cities, because everyone is so concerned about the lives of Black people now. Abuse is a gross violation of human dignity that we cannot allow and which we must continue to struggle against, Francis wrote. The Pope denounced taking down Confederate statues in the U.S., describing it as erasing history. Francis also touched upon the pandemic and blasted people who have protested lockdown restrictions. He blasted those people as if the measures that governments must impose for the good of their people constitute some kind of political assault on autonomy or personal freedom, exclamation point. That is exactly what they are. You might be in favor of them, you might be against them, but they are a political assault on autonomy and personal freedom. How else can they be described? Francis accused some in the church and Catholic media of being part of the problem. You'll never find such people protesting the death of George Floyd or joining a demonstration because there are shanty towns where children lack water or education. A lot of shanty towns in the United States, are there? They turned into a cultural battle of what was in truth an effort to ensure the protection of life. Oh, you're really sailing close to the wind here. Francis suggested the world should use the pandemic as a way to reset. Isn't that a conspiracy theory? He offered 3 moments of personal crises of his own that gave him the chance to stop, think, and change course. This book, okay, here we go. The Catholic Church has spoke out eloquently against socialism, as well as unbridled capitalism. In the encyclicals of New Things, and 40 Years On, which came out in the late 19th century and early 20th century. But this Pope is he's a socialist, pure and simple. Francis repeated his call for universal basic income, for welcoming migrants, and what he calls the 3 L's that everyone needs: land, lodging, and labor. We need to set goals for our business sector that, without denying its importance, look beyond shareholder value to other kinds of value that save us all: community, nature, and meaningful work. And nothing speaks of community and maintaining community than your country being overrun by millions, tens of millions of illegal foreigners. The book was ghostwritten by Francis's English language biographer, Austin Ivory. This is the same fellow who described the campaign that went on within the conclave, led by what's called the Sankt Gallen or St. Gallen Mafia, referring to a place in Switzerland. Now, this campaigning is illegal, and Ivory, he walked all of that back. From Channel STV, Pope Francis pressures young Catholics for a new economy. He urged young Catholic entrepreneurs Saturday to develop a new, more just economic model that could save a mistreated planet while helping the poor and the excluded. He spoke via a video message beamed to a virtual meeting of young business leaders and urged them to make major changes to global economic relationships. You recognize the urgent need for a different economic narrative, he said. The present world system is certainly unsustainable from a number of points of view and is harming our sister Earth, so gravely maltreated and despoiled, together with the poor and the excluded in our midst. He pointed out that the coronavirus epidemic had caused people to think about the situation the world found itself in. Once the present health crisis is passed, the worst reaction would be fall even more deeply into feverish consumerism. The Argentinian-born Pope is regularly taking capitalism to task, accusing it of indifference to social inequality and a party to the depletion of the planet's resources. He pressed the young business leaders and academics from 115 countries to give birth to an economic culture that inspired trust and creative resources that will enlighten minds, warm hearts, and give all the young people, with no one excluded, a vision of the future. You notice that this Pope never talks of sin or what he believes to be sin. He's always political. It's all political with him. And projection, too. that he just, the idea that there are Catholics out there who love the old forms and they love the old prayers and they love things like novenas. This, it personally infuriates him that we moved on from all of this. When I was in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, I happened to pass by a Holy Rosary Cathedral, and there were some people waiting for morning mass on Saturday, and they were all the old Chinese. They were all Chinese women, old Chinese women, and I guess those people like the old forms, you know. But Pope Francis is not. He's not concerned about whether people go to mass or not. I think he would much prefer it if people just stopped entirely. Head McNeck says, I spent an entire December in the southern UK a couple of years ago, and I almost lived in a cheap pub beer. I think my average pint at Spoons was £2.50. In London, what are people paying? £7-8 for a pint? Yako Raipala, our Finnish friend, says, Oi, mate, got a license for that freedom? Yes. Jay Lux says, if UK cops start, yeah, okay. I refused to say that the first time around. Okay. I have a final look at the chat here. Again, I did not get to Lena Dunham. I think it's fairly obvious why I didn't get to Lena Dunham, because there's something oppressive about talking about her and her ever so miserable life that we all must be informed of in the greatest possible depressing detail. But no, I make a promise. I will talk about Lena Dunham tomorrow. I learned from Crazy Days and Nights that apparently she wants to become a foster parent. Lena Dunham is not married. She does not have a partner, either heterosexual or homosexual. She admitted in her autobiography to sexually abusing her younger sister. She also later confessed that this accusation of rape from Oberlin College was not true. Am I to believe that New York City authorities would actually allow young children in her presence to give her some sort of powers of guardianship over a child? It's really remarkable. If true. Tim Humphrey says, greetings, KMG and fellows. The Queensland and New South Wales border opens on December 1st. Looks like a loosey-goosey Xmas. I won't be coughing till next year. Hikma Warrior says, Ayatollah Khomeini gives better religious talks than this Pope. Well, I don't think that the Pope is particularly a religious man. Let's put it that way. Hikma Warrior says, part of wisdom is to refrain from feeding one's energy to hungry ghost media figures. I like that expression. I never heard that before. The Berea says, I won't trust her with a cat. You know, I watched the first 2 seasons of Girls, maybe the first 3 seasons of Girls, because I like to stay au courant with the culture. Not very many people ever watched the show, but the critics all did. And, I'm told that it was influential or inspiring to people. There's this episode of Girls where she meets this young man and he's severely autistic. He's not what you'd call high functioning. She essentially sexually assaults him in a field. Okay. There's another preposterous episode where she meets this handsome doctor, say late 30s. You know the kind of commercials where you see handsome, sexy daddy. He's that kind of guy, right? And he owns this fabulous pad in Brooklyn where, the floors of the bathroom are heated and all this kind of stuff. It's a brownstone, and he's got the big veranda and he's cooking up these huge steaks And of course, he wants to have sex with Lena Dunham because, of course, that's what handsome, successful men want to do, is to have sex with Lena Dunham. And so this happens. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm waiting for the twist ending, right? At one point, she starts raving at him, I guess because things are going too well. And she accuses him of not taking it seriously when she told him that she'd been sexually abused by an uncle growing up. And then she says, I probably made it up, but you still should have cared. This is at the point where the man says to the woman, leave now, and if I see you again, I will call the police. And again, I was waiting for the twist ending. And the twist ending was obviously that Lena Dunham was going to be in her messy bed alone, having never left her apartment, fapping away furiously. And the show ended. And I thought, are we seriously supposed to believe that this happened? That this actor, Patrick Wilson, that he's having sexual intercourse with Lena Dunham, with all of the women in, New York City that he could choose, he would choose Lena Dunham. No. I just, sorry to go on so long about girls, but I just thought, this woman doesn't seem to have any kind of imagination at all, because her character, her name was Hannah, something like that. She was, apart from the fact that she was supposedly from Michigan, her character was just Lena Dunham in all its obnoxiousness. Metatron says Lena Dunham should be considered a hate speech. Oh, yeah. When that show Girls started, the Hannah character with this enormous tattoo, which starts, here in the back, goes all the way down. It's like a spider web. And I thought, that's a really nice touch, that woman, that this character would have such a large, grotesque tattoo. And then, oh, come on. That's actually Lena Dunham's real life tattoo. Ugh. Okay, DB Cooper, that'll be the final comment of the day. It seems to me that what differentiates our oligarchs from other ones, say the 1917 Russian nobility or those of the PRC, is that while theirs are indifferent to the suffering of the proles, and the rest. Metal Mike says, if a chick looks like Henry Rollins, count me out. Here's the rest. Our oligarchs hate the proles and are obsessed with imposing humiliation and suffering. And on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap up the show. What is coming up culture-wise this week? Great American Classic on Theater Thursday, Frank Capra's 1941 film Meet John Doe, starring arguably the two greatest actors of the 20th century America, Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck. December 10th, Michael Mann's Manhunter from 1986. December 17th, I'm going to have three movies in a row which are based around, take place around Christmas or New Year's. So on December 17th, from 1969, Eric Romer, Ma Nuit chez Maud, My Night at Maud's. On December 24th, a movie about a true story, The Christmas Armistice on the Western Front of World War I, Joyeux Noël by Christian Carillon. And on the book club, fascinating book. This week, Claire Ellis, The Blackening of Europe 1. All about Pan-Europa and Eurabia and Eurafrica. December 4th, the book of philosophy by Spaniard Miguel de Unamuno, Tragic Sense of Life. On December the 11th, three funny books about a horrible world. Louis Ferdinand Céline's World War II, a trilogy of North Castle to Castle and Rigadoon. On December the 18th, collected poetry by my favorite poet, Roy Campbell. And on December 25th, which is Christmas Day, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to read a story in its entirety, and we'll talk about some other things. But it's one of my very favorite stories. It's by Leo Tolstoy, and it is called What Men Live By. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be very much appreciated at this particular time, my PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money donation directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I shall leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.